All right, welcome back to Myth Vision Podcast. I'm your host, Derek Lambert. Our guest today, Dr. Justin Sledge with Esoterica. How you doing?
I'm doing great, Derek. It's great to be back on. Gonna hopefully tackle some hard questions and really get into some really important stuff today. So I'm looking forward to it.
100%. Thank you. Let's get this party started. We are Myth Vision. Welcome back. I look forward to today's episode. What a hot topic. I almost titled it, but for the sake of monetization, for the sake of protecting it, you gave me the suggestion, Judaism, is it racist? And, obviously I was like, yeah, I definitely don't want YouTube canceling this video or possibly blocking me from monetizing. So we're going to deal with some of the hotter issues and also how we handle how people have kind of interpreted things throughout history and diving into that. But before we do, I got to let everybody know, if they want real salvation, not that fake stuff that people sell, right? Go subscribe to Esoterica. I hear that the flames, it's kind of like Zoroastrianism. The flames are like warm milk, right? It doesn't harm you when you get there. So make sure you go subscribe. It puts at least one coat of warmth protection. Check out his website, justinsledge.com. You can learn more about his background, teachings, presentations, and of course, most of the stuff is on the YouTube channel. Is there anything you'd want to say about your website?
I mean, it's a place where you can contact me directly. So if folks ever have like a specific burning question, they want to reach out, you can contact me there. Also, I sell really cool, old, weird, rare books. So if you ever are in the business of wanting to buy a 600-year-old book of magic, I sometimes have those for sale, which is it's a pretty fun side hustle, dealing in 400-year-old books.
I think that's really neat, and definitely one day might get me one just for looks in my office. It makes you feel a little bit special, being able to tap into history like that. So
no, it is something really special about holding a book that's older than this country.
That is pretty powerful the way you put that. You do have a Patreon. I hope everybody who's interested in supporting you after they hear what you have to say, you have multiple levels. They can go and do that. What do you offer on your Patreon?
Yeah, you get early access. So we have a really great collaboration coming out tomorrow with Religion for Breakfast, which I think is the largest religious studies channel on YouTube, about Jesus and about sort of other miracle workers in the Galilee, which will be a really fun episode to work with. So you get access to that stuff early, and you get access to me, and we have private hangouts and stuff like that. So it's basically you get a deeper level more esoteric level of access. So that's the big thing that you're getting there with the Patreon. And also, there's not a lot of people working on the kind of material I work on, so you get to rest easy at night knowing that you're supporting someone to get this material out there that otherwise would either get out there badly or not get out there at all.
Well put. I also, last of all, notified my Patreon of the live today and have done quite a bit of work. I really can't emphasize how much work I do on recording this stuff. I have a video that'll be dropping today sometime. I'm working on multiple videos right now, actually, that I find are going to be very useful, interesting stuff, comparing Jesus to Julius Caesar Augustus, if you will, with collabing, if you will. My friend Neil, he did an amazing episode, and I really want to get more emphasizing, if you will, focusing on that particular person that's contemporary to the situation that we're seeing in the first century, and how much is reflected there. So a lot of people who take the story of Jesus literally should probably evaluate the historical method a little more and consider what's going on in the zeitgeist of the time. But yes, you can help support me. You can harass me, private message me, all sorts of fun stuff. And I do plan on doing more with this, like you talked about, private shows with just my Patreon members, and maybe do like a once a month thing. I'm working on it. I am a one-man army and lots going on. So that's our intro. Okay, that's our intro. Now, the tough part. I'll be back in an hour. Just finish up. Let me know when you're done. Okay?
Yes. See you, Derek. It's funny because in the philosophy department where I teach, I feel like sometimes they just like they're in private meetings and like, let's just take all the really controversial stuff and just give it to Sledge. So like, I literally teach a class called Race, Sex, and Religion. I'm like, all right, you put every like possible thing to get me canceled into one class and just like go. I'm like, all right, guys, thanks. I appreciate the opportunity to get canceled every single class. So
I must say, just a caveat, as we're entering into a very tough subject, anti-Semitism is a real thing. There's also the idea that you can't criticize because this group, the people group, have been persecuted so much throughout history. You kind of wonder, while there are people who absolutely hate Jews, there is kind of built into the ideology, of course, too, that we are the suffering people and we're gonna suffer. And is it built into? It's almost like a trap in a way. It seems like in some cases, like it's almost like martyrdom with early church Christians. When I heard how this happened, it isn't like they just hated Christians. Oftentimes Christians went out breaking the law, harassing people with the gospel, and then they get killed for it. And then what happens? They become a saint and they consecrate certain churches because of this martyrdom. But it's like me today running up to a building, which things are a little different here in America, of course, but like running up to a building and purposely stirring up the hornet's nest. And then when I get attacked or whatever happens, I'm not saying that happens with all Jews. I'm saying, I wonder if the ideology is kind of built with that. So I want to be very cautious as we enter and approach this. This is why I have you on here. You're a practicing Jew. That doesn't mean you ontologically believe in the things that are there, but you are a religious Jew in that sense to help address this hot subject. And we want to make sure that we aren't going to too many extremes when we explain the data.
Right. Yeah, I think it's crucially important to understand that criticizing Judaism is completely philosophically and religiously possible and doesn't make you an anti-Semite, right? So you can criticize tenets, aspects of Judaism. So I think
I do, by the way.
Yeah, I think I do all the time too. And trust me, I get a lot of hate from Orthodox people who are like, how dare you question blah, 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 blah. So that's one thing. Also, criticizing Israel, the state of Israel. It's a political country like any other country, and criticizing a country is well within anyone's purview. I think where the dovetail is when you're criticizing Judaism and nothing else, right? Or when you're criticizing Israel and no other country, and that's kind of all you do. And then if that happens, and I'm also seeing you're surrounding yourself with a bunch of, racist, bigoted people, then I begin to look side-eyed at that. But I have no problem with anyone criticizing Judaism. In fact, I'll say this. When I teach ethics, intro ethics, the person that gets the last word in my intro ethics class is the greatest critic of Judaism in all of history. That's Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche was the most vociferous critic of Judaism and Christianity. He deeply hated Judaism. He thought it was just a very bad idea. And he thought also that it had given bad ideas over to Christianity. And the reason why I teach Nietzsche and why I feel totally comfortable teaching Nietzsche is because I know he wasn't an anti-Semite. And I know that not because he said he wasn't, because anyone can say anything they want to say. People say, I'm not a racist all day long and do racist stuff.
Exactly.
Right? What I know about Nietzsche is that Nietzsche, despite the fact that his writings were manipulated by anti-Semites, Nietzsche spent a lot of his life openly criticizing anti-Semitism and nationalism. So much so that one of his best friends, Wagner, the composer, rabid anti-Semite, he publicly ended his relationship with Wagner and then wrote a critique of Wagner openly. So it's one thing to say, oh, I'm not an anti-Semite. I've just spent all my time criticizing Judaism or whatever. It's another thing when you call out anti-Semites and say, look, I have real problems with Judaism as a religion, as a value system, perhaps.
Right.
But I have no trouble with anti-Semites. And Nietzsche, I think, is a quintessential example of a person who I deeply respect, who criticized Judaism, and at the same time had nothing to do with anti-Semitism and actively worked against it his entire life. So I think that's a careful balancing act, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's a really important kind of balancing act. And that's why people say, oh, well, Jews don't want anyone to criticize their religion, or they use the history of their persecution as a way of avoiding that.
Right.
I don't do that. I criticize my religion. I openly criticize it to Orthodox people, and I read critiques of Judaism. I teach critiques of Judaism. So, yeah,
I
that's
think you
just
said that
not.
pretty well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just not what I'm about. I think that every religion, every thought system has to be open to criticism, because if for nothing else, it can't grow. It can't change and update itself. And so
this is why I'm critical
yeah.
of not only Christianity, because I came from it, which is most of my experience comes out of Christianity, but the father to Christianity would be the Hebrew scriptures, which would be the scriptures of the Jews, of course, as well, which would be Judaism. And, I look at that, and I talk about the evolution of God. I show like slavery, ancient concepts that are just not good, outdated, right? We learn from these things. And so I also do that with Islam, because my goal is to see more progression. I know some people who they've been like, let's say, for example, I know some people who've been harmed by Islam, and they literally cannot imagine any, like, they hate it so much that they want to eradicate it, rather than like be patient with the people who are in it and try to have them progress to a more healthy approach, and eventually let them make the decision for themselves whether they want to let go of it altogether or not. But I would rather see a change, like progression and an evolution, than act like we're going to eradicate this thing, which isn't going to happen. So I don't want to create more fundamentalists either. I don't want to have Muslims go, the text says this. Well, you know what? That good point, Derek. Now I'm going to go chop someone's head off, or something like that. I want them to see that text is ugly and go with their moral compass and say, actually, that's not for me today, and admit this is no good. However, I don't see the use for it. You see, like for me, I don't see the use for needing the text anymore. I don't need the religion at all, which might be different to hear your take of like why you do still practice it. And there's going to be an interesting thing. So I think we did a good intro here in explaining ourselves somewhat as we're going to embark this difficult conversation. If you want to start us out, feel free, and then we'll take questions whenever you want.
Sure. I guess what I would say as a sort of opening remark maybe is that we should be honest about a couple of things. One thing that we can be honest about is that the logic of monotheism can be easily made into a logic of intolerance, which is just to say, if you believe in one God and you really do believe that you uniquely have access to that God, or salvation, or knowledge, or gnosis, or whatever, well, then that's an inherently insider-outsider way of doing religion. And of course, Judaism, Israelite religion, did that. One can look at the Hebrew Bible, and especially the Torah, as a kind of vassal contract between Israel and the God that they worshiped. And that deal, right, is that you do this and I'll do this, and there's a deal there. Now, there's something like very Iron Agey about that, and that shouldn't be surprising to us, because it's an Iron Age text. They're thinking in the Iron Age. They're writing texts like that. So I think it can be that way, right? But religions aren't things inherent out there somewhere. Judaism isn't out there. Judaism is what Jewish people do. It's what Jewish people believe now. And so there's a reality that we inherit traditions that can be deeply problematic, and I'll name some of those in just a second. But that is not the horizon of what a religion is. It's not just all the bad things and good things that come from tradition. Tradition, like I'd like to tell my students, is basically peer pressure from dead people, right? And if you allow the worst kinds of things to be incorporated into your religion without any attempt at making moral progress, then you can get pretty nasty versions of these religions. And I think that there are really nasty versions of all of these religions. I think there are really nasty versions of Buddhism out there. There are Buddhist fundamentalists like murdering Muslim people. Buddhist your whole gig is like peace and sit down and be quiet. Like it's unimaginable, but every religion can do this. So I think that there's just a reality here that inside of all of these texts and traditions, there are deeply worrying things. And I say, for instance, in Judaism, there's deeply bigoted anti-Gentile sentiment that you can find going back from the Hebrew Bible. It's in the Talmud. It's in the Zohar. You can find it in Maimonides. It's there. it's not unique to Judaism to find that kind of stuff. You can find all kinds of, Christian people saying dreadful things about non-Christians. You can find Muslim people saying the same thing about non-Muslim people. You can say Muslim people saying the same thing about other kinds of Muslim people.
Yeah.
Right? Sunnis and Shias, Catholics, Protestants. So
can I just read the definition real quick, just so people understand of bigotry? That I mean, just Google it. Right? It says obstinate or unreasonable attachment to a belief, opinion, or faction. In particular, prejudice against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular group. So if you're a Muslim and you see Jews as less than or somehow lower than you because they don't accept Muhammad as prophet, or if you're a Christian, you think you're chosen and the Jews killed Christ, or you imagine they're subordinate or they're ideologically less than or whatever,
right.
That can still be a bigotry. There's like, it fits this category. So I just want to make that clear.
Then I can already see in the chat that someone, one of the people in the chat has already quoted the most famous of these the anti-Gentile comments made in the Talmud. And I can cut.
You want to share your screen?
I can just cut and paste it. If I always encourage people, if you're going to quote something, just quote it. Don't misquote it. That's the actual line from the Talmud.
You sent it to me?
Okay. Yeah, I sent it to you. Yeah, so you can put it in the chat if you want.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So, good luck on me understanding that.
Yeah. Right. Well, maybe the anti-Semites in the chat will. So they're more than happy to quote these things. And again, and we can talk about Shimon Bar Yochai in this quote. I think it is a really dreadful quote. There's no denying that there are really dreadful things in the Talmud, and I think it's important to understand what the Talmud is, and to understand that when Shimon Bar Yochai says, right, that that the best of Gentiles is should be killed, and he does say that. He says the best of snakes should be killed. Also, he says the best of women are witches, which is funny. For whatever reason, the Nazis that quote this out of context never quote the misogynistic part, which I think is also equally hateful and dreadful. Which for a reason, I don't know why they don't quote that part. But Shimon Bar Yochai doesn't represent the entirety of the rabbis. In fact, just as an example of this, Shimon Bar Yochai actually said these kinds of things, and he was condemned by other rabbis in the Talmud. So when you quote Shimon Bar Yochai out of context, right, we can talk about historical context, and when you allow him, right, who was a bit of an extremist, even by rabbinical standards, not a single one of his Jewish legal rulings was accepted by the rabbis. Not one. He was completely ostracized in many ways because he was an extremist. When anti-Semites allow that one quote to represent the entire Talmud, I would say, yeah, you're quoting a really problematic, disturbing, disgusting, frankly, sentiment, but you're doing it in complete bad faith. You're not. It's like,
let me quote this and say this whole religion to its core, this is what they really mean.
This is all they really
believe.
This is all what they really believe.
And that is the caution that I'm trying to paint when I have people who are obviously critical, right? I'm critical, but it's like, I don't think that's what, I mean, I'm friends with Rabbi Tovia Singer, and I'm pretty sure he has some pretty conservative views. I'm fairly certain he lives in Jerusalem. And
he may very well.
I've never really said, hey, but we talk, and he's like, love you, man. All right, I'm off. Like, I don't get a single secret hiding. I can't wait for you to be destroyed, you goy, or whatever.
Yeah. The thing is, they'll say is, oh yeah, but when he gets off camera and he's in the synagogue, what he really says is
right. And
I'm like,
I'm not thinking that there's that going on, right? I give people the benefit of the doubt and think that they're humans like me. They want to eat, they want to sleep, they want to go and lay down with their women, whatever, whatever it might be, whatever your choice is.
People are real similar under the hood at the end of the day. Yeah. And so, they're absolutely dreadful things in Judaism. Just like, I mean, again, I can go take Martin Luther, right? Who, if anyone represents Protestants, it's him. I can go quote to you from On the Jews and Their Lies.
Yeah.
And if I said, oh yeah, this is what Protestants believe. That's
all Protestants are Martin Luther anti-Semites, no.
Yeah.
We know that. Yeah.
That's like, it's the most, Jean-Paul Sartre in his book, Anti-Semite and Jew, which I think is one of the best books ever written about anti-Semitism. And Jean-Paul Sartre is just an amazing philosopher. The one thing that he points out is how anti-Semites aren't actually serious. They don't really want to do any real work. They don't want to actually do any real studying. They don't really want to learn real Hebrew. They don't want to really dive into this stuff. They just want to quote a bunch of stuff out of context to justify these otherwise like silly beliefs. It just so happens they're murderous, silly beliefs. And so that's part of like what I mean when I look at a lot of the things that I see coming from like anti-Semitic sources, I'm like, I would take you seriously if you quoted this correctly, or you pronounced, even just to give a basic pronunciation of a Hebrew word correctly. It's just you're not taking it seriously, and that's why I think that's in many ways it's just not. It's below decent people to deal with. I think people like that.
If I may, just to point out, something that is on my heart is that I look at, for example, Christians who are fundamentalist. I look at Muslims that are fundamentalist, and they're in this. They were taught this. This is where they were raised. I want them to, start to see mythology, start to see these things, and I would love to see them not be trapped in these kind of ideas that might be harmful to them and the world we live in today. So being cautious and showing them we don't hate them is a very important thing. And if all they see from you is this, then they're probably not thinking, oh, this guy loves me. They're probably thinking this guy hates me. If all they're seeing is like antagonism or things like that. So trying to balance that is difficult, especially if you're getting like constant hate by people from these groups back. But if you're trying to be balanced and have conversations, I just think that's the best way to go about it. And
sure, and I think the same. I get hatred from Orthodox Jews all the time on my channel. Like I get like super gross emails from them, and so yeah, I feel like the same way with Orthodox or Haredi Jews or ultra Orthodox.
Mm-hmm.
Like I don't hate them. I dislike what they believe.
There's some bad stuff in there, though.
Oh, there's really bad stuff. There's like, and again, like super toxic stuff. There's anti-Jewish, I mean, it's just straight up misogyny, homophobia. It is like I compare them to the Taliban. Like in the same way that I hope that I feel terrible for the women and most just general people in Afghanistan living under the Taliban. I feel terrible for most regular people living under Haredi power because it's also just as repressive and just as fundamentalist and intellectually violent and just physically violent. I think that if they ever had political power, they would do physical violence to people.
That's the concern. For example, Adam, my buddy, mm-hmm. I just want to mention that's his concern. And though they're not in power, you know what I mean? In that respect, I see there's a bigger threat with larger groups like the Taliban that you actually mentioned. Mm-hmm. And I would love to see, them disappear, these ideas stop, and to change and progress. How do we do it? That's tough. That's a tough thing to.
It is tough. And I've worked directly with a person I know founded an organization called Footsteps. And she is a former Haredi person who left the Haredi world, which is a very brave thing to do. She rejected Jewish fundamentalism, left the Haredi world, and founded an organization to help people transition out of that world. Mm. I think that's a heroic thing for a woman to do. So I find it to be a wonderful organization that really, and she gets hate like you can't imagine. And so I think that people should be, this is a free country, people should be able to practice their religion as long as they're not harming others with it. And I think that these fundamentalist sects come really close to the line, and I'm always happy to see people transition out of them. But at the end of the day, you're not gonna force them out of fundamentalism, and the more that you try, the more they're going to double down on it. So, I think that these variants of Judaism they terrify me, because trust me, in history, if you look to history, when those people got power, I'll give you the example of the Maccabees. When the Maccabees got power, they weren't interested in just taking down the Greeks. Mm-hmm. They targeted liberal, progressive, Hellenizing Jews.
Right.
And for me, I'm all about, I want to maintain my traditions and my customs as rigorously as I can in relationship to modernity.
Right.
And that's a hard balancing act, and I'm never going to strike it well because no one can. But our traditions are important. They should have a vote in how we live our lives, but they shouldn't have a veto about where we shut our intelligence down or, other kinds of things like that. And so it's very important for me to live in that balance. And I think that there are many people for whom that balance is never strikable. They've been so badly hurt by religion mm-hmm. that they have every right to be like, I'm never looking back.
Right.
right? And also traditional people, I think, should have the right to make that decision to transition out if they so see fit. So that's a hard balance to strike. But again, am I going to sit here and deny that there are dreadful, bigoted things in Judaism? No. But it's just interesting that anti-Semites are really, really concerned about the anti-Gentile stuff. I'm like, why aren't you focusing on all the anti-gay stuff or the anti-women stuff?
Right.
Like, trust me, if you think that's bad,
Right.
like,
Well, some of them may actually be anti-gay themselves. That's why. So maybe
oh,
they're conservative in some sense. They're like, you know what, gays are weird or whatever. They might
yeah,
try to
they're
say.
like, we like Haredi Judaism when it's against gay people.
Yeah, as long as we have the same ideology and we think
Yeah.
the same, and I fit in this category, we don't have a critique of that. But if it is a
Yeah.
critique of this one thing about people who are not within my bubble group, then that's a no-go, and it's not okay. And so we find this throughout history. I'd like to get to these super chats if you don't mind, and then we can rabbit trail if you're cool.
And I'll say this one last thing. I think it's also interesting about the numbers of all this, right? Like, anti-Semites just strike me as interesting because lots of religions have lots of problematic things about outsiders, right? Like, you can go Shintoism. Like, Shintoism has some of the most horrifying anti-non-Japanese people stuff, right? No one's going after Shintos, right? It's no, I don't really hear people going anti-Shinto stuff. You're talking about Jews represent less than 1% of the world. Less than 1%. There are more Sikhs in the world than Jews, right? And of those 20 million Jews, probably 15% of those believe this stuff. And I think there's a weird narcissism on the part of the anti-Semite that somehow believes that behind closed doors, that 15% of 1% is spending any of their time thinking about non-Jews. I can tell you, I've lived in the Haredi world. They don't. They mostly want non-Jews to leave them alone so they can continue to do the way they live their life. And so I think it's a weird kind of narcissism on the part of the anti-Semite, where the anti-Semite believes that there are these secret cabals of Jews sitting in their synagogues thinking about Gentiles all day. I'm like, no, they're mostly thinking about like some really technical thing in the Talmud. That's what they spend all their day doing. So yeah, it's a bizarre kind of narcissism that I often get from anti-Semites. So it's just like this group of people who represent less than 1% of the world, and 15% of those people are these ultra-Orthodox people. Why do you care so much that they don't like non-Jews?
Yeah,
it should be of some level of laughable inconsequence, but it's not.
Yeah, in comparison to the grand scheme. But what do you think the motivation behind that is, if you were to guess? Because I've heard some groups of these people will say that Jews rule the world. Like,
all right, they have to jump to conspiracy land to justify it, and it's always some variant of medieval blood libel. Jews control the world. Jews have a disproportionate impact on politics. Jews control Hollywood. It's always some version of that. Which man, look, I wish that if the Jews ran the world, where's my check? Like, I'm on live stream trying to get super chats to pay my bills. Jews control the world. And it's you have to jump to conspiracy land. And at that point, am I really going to take that seriously? That this sort of conspiratorial stuff? No, I mean, I don't have any evidence of that kind of thing. I mean, again, I've seen in synagogue boardrooms where Jews can hardly keep their synagogues together, much less like sit in a room and like agree to control the Gentiles. I'm like, come on. Or like George Soros controls all this stuff. It's an intellectually dishonest analysis of why the world is messed up. And the world is messed up. But the idea that this tiny group of people is the reason why it's messed up is just like hilarious. And then they have to keep cranking it up, right? Because then they have to, they're secret aliens or lizards, or it's always some they have to keep cranking up because it makes less and less sense, and somehow saying crazier stuff makes it make more sense. So yeah, it's bizarre. It's a bizarre thing. And you see in the chat, right? Like, Jews are trying to take away free speech. Like, what are you talking about?
I'd like to know who they are, and just so maybe you point out some Jews that actually say something that would go against it. Who else is trying to take away free speech? Tons of other people are also trying to do that. Why is it this
secretly? It's the Jews that are secretly behind. They're pulling all the strings. And if you want evidence for it, then they're gonna. It's just one of these things where it's always kick the can down the road when these conspiracy theories come out. And And again, I'm not saying there are not bad Jews out there. Of course, there are bad Jews. They're bad people of every religion. But again, in order to justify, you have to do this conspiracy move. And
I wanted to open up this way. I didn't want to
Yeah.
get any questions yet because we're probably going to get some tough questions. I ask that everybody be respectful when you ask them, even if they're critical. Dr. Sledge is open to that. If they're disrespectful or rude, or it's obvious that this is not, or this is coming out of bad faith, these are things he's not interested in addressing. So don't waste your money if you're not trying to give a decent, respectful, critical question or a serious question, because
Sure.
I am interested in diving into some of the ugliest parts we can throughout history. That might be stuff that stems from the literature, the actual scriptures themselves, that kind of promotes ideas that people are interpreting in negative ways. That's all game. And maybe we'll get into those, but let's get started with the super chats. You cool with that?
Yeah, I'm down.
Awesome. Gnostic informant Neil, how much of a role do you think the church played in anti-Semitism throughout history?
So I think this is an interesting question. Thanks, Neil. So the church is a complicated bag, right? I would say that in some ways, baked into Christianity is a kind of anti-Judaism. It's a supersessionist religion. Man, that's just the way that it functions. It says, look, there was the Old Testament, now there's a new one. And I think that the fact that Jews never converted always was a thorn in the side, pardon my metaphor, in Christianity, because the very persistence of the Jews is kind of an argument against their religion. Right. So I think that there's the supersessionist theology is part of it. Now, there's a flip side of this too, right? The church at Avignon, some of the popes actually were doing their very best to prevent anti-Semitic violence. During, for instance, the Black Death, the popes repeatedly said, you cannot, as good Christians, attack Jewish people. You can't. So it's really important here to notice that the church is playing a really, really complicated role. Because on the one hand, they do want to convert Jews, because that is proof of the correctness of Christianity. On the other hand, the institutional church of the Middle Ages actively called for the end of Jewish violence against Jews, pogroms and spontaneous violence and stuff like that. So I think that the church has a complicated role here. Did they also accelerate things like the blood libel? Yeah, they did. Right? They did accelerate the idea that Jews were poisoning wells. Did they do things like borrow money from the Jews and then default on that, then blame the Jews for being, money lenders? Yeah, they had double standards like that. So I think what's important about this is to realize that history is really complicated, and that as much as you want to blame the church for facilitating anti-Jewish sentiment, which it certainly did, it was also a place where Jews could petition for protection and sometimes got it. So it's complicated. This is a really complicated thing, I think. And I think that we often just buy a bunch of 18th century Protestant propaganda that just imagines the medieval church as a bunch of inquisitors burning everybody. That's not accurate. It's like Protestant propaganda. It's anti-Catholic propaganda that somehow stuck in Protestant lands. And we've now inherited the idea that, they're just book burning inquisitors in the Middle Ages.
I gave a speech at my college, Carolina Bible College, it's a fundamentalist Baptist type college. I gave a speech about the Inquisition and was like pointing out how we got the truth. And so I definitely know how I was just aiming at the bad and trying to focus on. Yeah.
And the Inquisition was obviously bad. It did do terrible things, but it was also like the first rigorous system of actual evidence-based law in Europe. So if you were accused of something, you could actually defend yourself with evidence, as opposed to previously where the idea was, well, if God's on your side, here, carry this hot chain to prove you're innocent.
The Puritans had some weird stuff too, but yeah.
Yeah, but it's at least and this is to point this out, right? In areas in which the Inquisition was very powerful, witches weren't killed at the same rate as other places because they actually required evidence. You couldn't just say, I saw so-and-so in a dream. They actually required evidence. So I think it's really important for people to understand that the church is a complicated factor in all this. Certainly they played a role in the development of anti-Semitism, right?
So is it fair to say not only the church, but Judaism throughout history, the rabbis, they are also a complicated factor?
Sure.
I know that Islam was as well. Yeah. While there were times where Jews might have been targeted, there are times where they protected Jews, there are times where they helped Christians, Syriac Christians, there's time they attacked. It just depended, it's very complex.
Yeah, it depends on where it's not monolithic. And it all depends on where you are in history and what's going on. And I think that it's I'm not going to sit here and paint it. And like sometimes you hear people say, "Well, Christianity is inherently anti-Semitic." I'm like, that's not true. It's not true. It is supersessionist, but how you deal with that, what you do with that on the ground, determines at some level the degree to which you're going to be anti-Semitic or not anti-Semitic. So yeah, I think the church is a complicated factor in all this, but and even the Catholic Church is interesting because in the Middle Ages, you would have what is called the Latin polemical tradition, where they would argue against Jews in order to try to convert them. You have these disputationes, these disputations, where Jews were forced to defend the Talmud or forced to defend Judaism, and if they couldn't, they could be expelled and stuff like that. That's also, by the way, why a lot of Jews are very uncomfortable going and having to defend their faith to anti-Semites, because it feels a lot like the Middle Ages again, and that's not a comfortable place to feel. But they had these kinds of debates and you have these kinds of things like that. But what's interesting about medieval Catholicism is that medieval Catholicism kind of gave up on converting Jews actually, and more or less just thought they're going to convert at the end of time. So there's no real sense that you need to go out and try to convert them in mass. And that's why you don't see, for instance, like widespread inquisitions against Jews in the Middle Ages or widespread crusades against Jews in the Middle Ages, like you saw against the Catholic Church did wield against Muslims and against other Christians, like the Waldensians. So you have to understand the Catholic Church is complicated here theologically. They're not convinced that you need to convert Jews. What they're really thinking at some level is they're going to convert at the end of time anyway. Therefore, kind of leave them alone. Now, that's not to say there weren't intense, sporadic violence, but the church, I think, typically did not encourage that and actively tried to stop it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Neil, we're going to be live tonight. If you want to come hang out over at Gnostic Informant, probably going to talk about mythicism and different things. I think Neil was saying like some of the things that helped him to try and think there was probably a guy. So be sure to check that out. Go subscribe to Gnostic Informant. Thank you so much for that. Robert Herring says, "Alms for an ex-leper." Thank you so much, Robert, for that. I really appreciate that Life of Brian reference. Always fun. Dustin Ellerby, thank you for the super chat. Awesome guest. Thanks for the hard work, Derek. Question: who are the Judeans that are being referred to in the New Testament text? Were they the elites, all Judeans, or those opposed to the Jesus groups?
Yeah, this is a tough one, and I think it depends. And I think there's a decisive moment in the Gospel of Matthew where you finally get this phrase "Ho Yehudoi," the Jews, and I think that moment is like, if you really want to strike fear into the heart of Jewish people everywhere, that one moment where it's Ho Yehudoi, right? The Jews are responsible for the execution of Jesus. You have that terrifying section in Matthew, let his blood be upon us and upon our children. Of course, that spelt the doom to many, many poor people through European history. I think that the people that the writers of the Gospels don't like are the people that they're having to deal with directly as the Jesus movement is developing. And that's probably the Jerusalemite authority system, which would include Pharisees and Sadducees and people like that. But I'm thinking probably they're mostly concerned about the people they're getting resistance to. And Elaine Pagels has a decent argument, I think, a good argument, that part of how even the concept of the devil is developing in Christianity has a lot to do with the synagogue of Satan and stuff like that, is being developed as they're getting friction from the Jewish establishment. And what's interesting is you see a lot of that kind of stuff in the Gospels and some early texts in Christianity, but then after the temple's destroyed and after the Bar Kokhba rebellion especially, you basically hear nothing about that anymore. You just don't hear about the Jews much anymore. You're not going to see much. You'll see a little bit of stuff here and there with Justin Martyr, but that's no longer the theological friction they're getting, and therefore the Judeans or Ho Yehudoi is in general not really that big of a deal to them anymore.
It's really it's in group out group Christians against Christians at this
point.
Yeah.
By the 4th century especially, you don't see any Christians. They're just like, we don't care about what Jews are, blah 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 blah. What really matters is those damn Arians.
Right.
Yeah, it's the Pelagians or it's or the Gnostics or whatever. So yeah, I think that it's when that friction, basically when Jerusalem's destroyed and becomes Aelia Capitolina after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, I think that it just becomes a non-issue. But I think that it's deeply unfortunate that the Gospels contain this anti-Ho Yehudoi, the Jews sentiment, because that's going to basically frame how Christians read colored Jews through the rest of Christian history up till now. And there is a direct correlation in the Middle Ages between passion plays, right, that take place around Easter, where they reenact that whole sequence of Jesus being tried and executed. There's a direct correlation between those passion plays, that time of the year, right, and then pogroms against Jewish communities in the Middle Ages. That his blood is on our, let his blood in, that it's a carte blanche for anti-Jewish violence, and it has been used as a justification for anti-Jewish violence, right? Christ killers. It's common.
As far as this question, were they the elites, all Judeans? I would really want to say very carefully when we're saying this term Judeans, what text? Because not all the texts are using it the same way. Mm-hmm. When you get into John seems to broad stroke a universal paintbrush, so to speak, right. Jews, which is like not just people from a region. Right. It is a category of people at this time. And this is the complexity, because when we see that word being used, there seems to be times where, yes, they're fighting against elites or look like Pharisees and Sanhedrin or whatever. There are other times, like in John's gospel, that seems like it is broad stroking Jews, because this is a late gospel in the game, right, that is already Saul. When you go to Paul and then later, like the Jews rejected the message, right? In the synagogues, they over and over were just kind of rejecting. Very rarely did they convert. And that sparks this thing. It's just like, it ain't the elites. It's Jews, period. Yeah, it's and Jews. This turns into anti-Semitism. But that, before we move on, Dustin, thank you for the super chat. I need a definition from you for our audience's sake. What do we mean anti-Semitism? What is the definition of this term, and how are we to use that?
Right, and I also think that anti-Semitism, as we know it now, is distinct from anti-Judaism. I think one can be anti-Jewish and not anti-Semitic. But I think that when you hold Jews as morally accountable for the ills of society or something, or for some other corporate sin, the execution of Jesus or whatever, that's when you cross the line into the idea of the entire group is somehow guilty of something and deserves to be punished. Anti-Judaism is a disagreement with a body of dogma, perhaps, or a religious critique or philosophical critique. But again, when you think about the world of the Gospel of John or something, or the world of sort of late classic Judaism, there are more Jews living in Alexandria than mm-hmm. Palestine. Like, Palestine's a backwater. I mean, like Philo brags about the fact that he's just never been there.
It's like the 15% in today's numbers of like extreme groups, whereas everybody else is enjoying this like esoteric syncretism of thought and Hellenistic philosophical approach to Judaism and stuff like that. While there's like these guys who are back here still eating locusts and honey, so to speak. And,
I mean, I'm sure Philo looked at the Judeans living in Judea, especially the Galileans, which were the backwardest of the backward. They just like them as bumpkins. They're like, I'm pretty sure Philo was like, oh God, they're rebelling again. Like, just, just be. And it's not like he wasn't a serious Jew. He was a very serious Jew. He went directly to Caligula to try to petition after a pogrom in Alexandria. So I think when we paint with these broad brushes, we're making a lot of mistakes.
Okay. Yeah. So to put simply, your definition of anti-Semitism is kind of like you've gone beyond just critiquing the religious worldview, the dogma and such, to, it seems like there's more, like you blame the people over. It's like there's something wrong with the people.
The people, there's something inherently wrong about Jewish people, and they're morally to be blamed as a group for some kind of failure. Whatever kind of failure, whether it's execution of Jesus or the degeneration of society or secretly controlling society to make capitalism or to make communism, right? Depends on which kind of anti-Semite you get. Right. It's always some kind of, either, they're too rich or they're too poor and they're a parasite on the economy, or they secretly control everything, or they really don't work. It's always something that, it's always this impossible paradox of how anti-Semitism works. We get blamed for being too capitalistic, and then you're like, oh yeah, but secretly, they're really communist. I'm like, pick a narrative, bro.
Right.
Like, if you're gonna blame us for something, you blame Jews for something, pick one.
Okay.
It can't be that. Yeah, but this is, I can pull up Jean-Paul Sartre's definition as you're reading that.
Yeah, go ahead. And I got my buddy Dan Jacobs. Actually, he did an introduction to the Mishnah. We were talking, I think it was the Mishnah. We were talking about the origins of rabbinic Judaism and stuff. And so I don't know if I made that video public yet, but I will. It is on Patreon and it will make its way onto YouTube. Thank you, Dan, for the super chat, my friend. I'm writing a book on history of anti-Semitism. I'm not sure if it would exist the way it does, not without Christianity. Maybe Holocaust would have not happened or would not have happened.
I'm just gonna put.
What do you think? Or did you want to say your definition and then?
Yeah, I put it in the private chat if you want to cut and paste it to the public chat.
Okay.
That's just this is Jean-Paul Sartre's definition. I think it's a great one.
You know what? I should probably let's have you read it, and I'm going to screenshot it, and we're actually going to pop it up.
Yeah,
and share it with the screen.
And so it's for Sartre, it's attributing all or part of his own misfortunes and those of his country to the presence of the Jewish elements in his community. And he proposes to remedy the state of affairs by depriving the Jew of certain of their rights, by keeping them out of certain economic and social activities, by expelling them from the country, or by exterminating them all. So that's a pretty good definition of anti-Semitism. I think it'll do.
There we go. Let me pop this down here for a second.
So the anti-Semite, the whole quote will be the anti-Semite blames all or part of their own misfortune. So I think that's a pretty decent one. If folks really want to read a great book on anti-Semitism, Anti-Semite and Jew is written by Jean-Paul Sartre, the French philosopher, and I think it's one of the best. I think it's absolutely one of the best.
Thank you for that.
So the question is, I'm not sure it would have existed the way it does without Christianity. Yeah, that's certainly true. I think that anti-Semitism relies on anti-Judaism, right? So that's part of how it works. It goes from being a theological critique to being a group critique. Mm-hmm. And I think that anti-Semitism, as we know it, really begins after the Black Death. I think after the Black Death and with the rise of modernity, we began to see anti-Semitism as opposed to just anti-Judaism. When you begin to blame an entire group of people on for the plague or whatever, or for capitalism or communism or whatever you want to blame that. So again, this is a situation where in anti-Judaism, you could critique Judaism and say, hey, I don't think Moses really existed, and therefore all these rules are mythological. I'm like, okay, yeah, I believe that too. It's another thing to say, yeah, and also you guys destroyed the economy, we're going to put you in concentration camps. You're like, hold on.
Yeah.
Right? See how those are very different kinds of things? And also anti-Semitism is anti-Judaism doesn't want Jewish people to cease to exist. It just simply says there are aspects of Judaism, or maybe all of it, that are mythological or otherwise incorrect. Anti-Semitism wants to see them destroyed. That's another big difference. Right. It's one thing for me to tell you that I don't like your taste in music. It's another thing for me to say that I think you should be annihilated for that taste in music. So would the Holocaust have happened without Christianity? Probably not. Right? If Christianity hadn't happened, the Holocaust probably wouldn't have happened either. But it's also important to point out that the Holocaust was done by secular people, right? There's the motivation behind the Third Reich was not Christianly inspired. They used Christian, the National Socialist German Workers' Party used Christianity as a veneer, right, to justify some of the stuff they were doing. But I would say that Nazism was fundamentally secular in its orientation. And so I think that it's important to note, right, how anti-Semitism can live without Christianity just fine. There's all kinds of pagan anti-Semites.
I mean, if we go before Christianity too, if you look at some of the writings of like Egyptian Manetho, or if you look at like some of how Greek and Romans wrote against Jews, you could see the criticism of their God almost come down on their people too. So like they had what we would call, by your definition, anti-Semitic tendencies. But there was narratives, combative narratives back and forth as well. And then they wouldn't just jab at their God. They'd have things to say about their people, things like that. So you kind of wonder, like.
Right. And the Romans were the Romans and the Greeks and stuff were very, I would say anti-outsider in a lot of ways. Barbarians, and the distinction between barbarians and Athenians or whatever. And also the Romans had a really interesting critique of Judaism. I mean, their critique was that the Jews were superstitious, that their religion was weird, but they still respected it because it was old. Right. They're like, yeah, your God is old. It's your invisible, weird God only localized in one place in Jerusalem is odd. You guys are weird. But it was never, you're weird and we're going to annihilate you for that.
Right.
And you're to be blamed for all the problems in the Roman Empire or something like that. The Romans are perfectly, individual Romans would criticize Judaism as superstitious, but the Romans were totally fine with bringing Judea into the fold and making them into citizens. And when the Jews rebelled, right, because no one likes to be colonized, of course they're going to put it down. That's true of any people that would have rebelled in the Roman Empire.
All right. Susie, thank you for the super sticker. And someone did have a just off-brand right there beneath her super sticker. I appreciate that, Susie. Is what kind of metal band shirt are you wearing today? Just so that we know.
It's Weakling. Anybody out there who likes Weakling? It's probably my favorite black metal band. Although they only released one album.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
Our next one is my buddy Timothy Mills. Could you please talk a bit? Yeah, thank you, Harmonic Atheist, with the 666. Talk about how the Book of Esther and Purim holiday relate to this topic.
Yeah. So the Book of Esther, Martin Luther hated the Book of Esther, and he hated it because of his anti-Semitism. And anti-Semites love to point out the massacre that happens at the end of the Book of Esther. So yeah, it plays into the idea that somehow that the Jews are violent or something like that. They control things behind the scenes and kill people. The Book of Esther is a piece of romantic fiction from the Persian Empire. One, it never happened. There's no evidence of any sort of massacre like that happening. But again, when you read it in a certain kind of way, you get this idea that the Jews are inherently violent or something like that. And yeah, you get these stories like this in the classical world where there's in-group violence or in-group, out-group violence. And part of how that works, and the same is true of the Book of Joshua, right? None of the conquest of Joshua happened. But the writer of that is kind of engaging in a kind of conquest fantasy. And I think that minority groups often engage in these kind of fantasies that I think are very unfortunate and pathological, actually, where the group of people that are persecuting them, they imagine striking back at them. This is true of colonized peoples or other kinds of people. And I think it's a super toxic and unhelpful and unhealthy way of thinking about how to solve your problems. But yeah, the Book of Esther and Purim are often touted by anti-Semites as proof of the inherent violence of Jews. I would just point out that there's lots of texts like this from antiquity in which you have these kind of conquest fantasies. The Aeneid is one of these conquest fantasies, right? And so, yeah, you get these conquest fantasies of these things that never happened, these sort of violent massacre fantasies that never happened. But yeah, they're fantasies and they never happened. And I think that anytime, also, by the way, it's worth pointing out that in the official Megillah reading, when you actually do the Megillah reading, you leave those parts out because it's considered to be, many rabbis look at those sections and say, this is terrible. This is really terrible. And this, and it's actually not read out loud during the actual Megillah reading when you read it in the synagogue because it's bad.
Wow.
Yeah,
it's good that they're trying to at least avoid that. That tells you an impact culturally and morally is taking place. I think I'd like to think that. Real quick, if I may, just to address CG, they seem to be in the category that wants to defend and show that you're just throwing words out. Listen, it's not just Jews, by the way. I love how it's always this hard on for Jews, right? That's a red flag to me. Like, dude, Muslims think the same thing. Christians wish to take over the world as well. Everybody does. But this 1% and 15% of this 1% of the world, let's focus on them.
Yeah, and they'll find one funny video, one weird video on the internet or whatever, or they'll get all these Haredi people saying dreadful things, and they're like, yeah, this is constitutive of all Jews. I'm like, this is constitutive of some Haredi people, Orthodox people. But yeah, I find that it's...
But it's in the text too. So mind you, how to go about it, different people had different thoughts of this.
Sure.
Even at the end, do we convert the Jews? Well, God will do it at the end of time. Right. This is in New Testament scholarship in Paul's literature. Does Paul think that once he gets the mission over with all the goy, that all of a sudden the Jews will realize and come back? The prophecies in the Hebrew Bible have this idea that at the end of time, the non-Jews will recognize the truth of Torah,
Sure.
recognize the truth of their God, and will grab a coattail of a Jew and say, hey, teach us your laws and take us to your mountain. Like,
sure. Okay. There's all kinds of fantasies
all
like that
sorts of
in the
stuff.
Talmud. Yeah. Oh, the
Right.
Talmud has all kinds of disgusting stuff about how at the end of time all the non-Jews will be slaves to the Jews, and this patently disgusting stuff. And again, what's important to know about the Talmud is not it's not a system of belief of what Jews believe. It's a bunch of arguments from a range of Jews over the course of centuries. And you can't take one part of the Talmud out and be like, oh, it says this really gross thing, and therefore all Jews believe that. That might not even been normative back then, right? And so it's really important that when you study the Talmud and talk about the Talmud publicly, or at all really, that you understand what the actual debate is, right? And then they even wonder whether that position was normative at that time, much less whether it's normative now.
Mhm.
And yeah, trust me, I've been in spaces with ultra-Orthodox Jews, and they say anti-Gentile stuff, and I'll call them out on it.
It's not enough, though, for some of these people.
Of
That's the
course,
thing.
no.
Some of the people that are going to be in the chat, or probably going to watch this later, or whatever, are going to feel like you calling out the bigots and the people that have these horrible backwards ideas that play a certain role in this religion. It's not enough, Dr. Sledge. No matter how much you say it, it's not enough, especially when you come back and go, but some of them aren't. They have this absolute to the core mentality, it seems, that no, I got to focus on them. They're the problem, this and that. And I've said this recently. Me and my buddy Adam have been talking about this. And I'm like, look, I don't focus on one. I focus on many religions, and I critique the religions, and I want to give people a chance to make the definition. We have wonderful conversations. I'm talking about Adam Green, who's No More Religion YouTube channel. And I pointed out, like, I personally, if I were to compare based on what I see in the world, I'm not saying some of these, like, obviously radical minded, bigoted Jews that you've discussed and will continue to discuss that have these ideas, if they were in power, like the Maccabees, sure, that's dangerous. Assuming they are, to me, is the opposition of danger. That's the opposite dangerous, because I'm looking, and to me, if you have the entire country of Afghanistan being controlled by the Taliban, if 3 of the United States, or 2 states in the United States got controlled by the Ku Klux Klan, and this was prevalent within the religion, I would say this is a really, really big problem. That raises in the real world problems. I would say we need to reevaluate this. But there's, like, a small little skirmish that goes on between Palestinians and Jews over here in the Middle East, in the state of Israel, and what goes on there. And you don't even side with what's going on. You if you don't mind, would you share that so that people understand you're not a Zionist or whatever?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's as simple as this. Jewish people should be safe wherever they are in the world, like everyone else should be safe. And ethnostates of any kind, Jewish or otherwise, are morally outrageous. I don't want white ethnostates. I don't want Jewish ethnostates. And so I think the process, you cannot have an ethnostate that is democratic. And I'm pretty committed to democracy. And so I just feel like that is a contradiction in terms. And yeah, anytime religion is used as a mechanism by which to expropriate land and harm human beings, the way that it is used to, the settler movement, stuff like that, I'm not with that. But and also I just feel like ethnostates don't make people safe. I think that's a doomed ideology. So yeah, I'm not on board with that project. But at the same time, Jews need to be safe, just like anyone. They're traumatized people. They've had a history of being traumatized. They deserve to be safe somewhere. But yeah, as far as ethnostates, no. And I think you can't be like, yeah, well, fascism's bad, except for like Jewish fascism, like Jabotinskyism and stuff like that. I'm like, no, I'm really against fascism. Like, you can't pick and choose your fascisms.
Thank you.
Either you want every human being on this planet to live and thrive and flourish, or you don't. And I'm not going to get on the team where, it's, the Jews deserve to be able to believe these horrible beliefs. Other people can get condemned for it. Absolutely no. I'm no truck with that.
Thank you. Mr. Monster says, I had a Christian tell me that the Talmud was plagiarized and they were lying. Obviously, that's not true. How would you reply to that person? The Talmud was just plagiarized.
Plagiarized from what?
Yeah, I'm kind of wondering, tell me that the Talmud was just plagiarized and they were lying. I don't.
Yeah, the Talmud is a massive text, right? We're talking about dozens of volumes. So I would need to know what it was plagiarized from. I think that the Talmud Yeah, there's no way the Talmud's plagiarized. It's a commentary on another book that would have to also be plagiarized at that point. So we would need hyper plagiarism to take place.
Yeah.
There are parts of the Talmud that have been censored, that have been put back in recently because of the danger of anti-Semitism. But no, it's not plagiarized.
Yeah, and the only thing I could think of is like, is there sources that use the Talmud? I think there's a possible case to be made, and the Quran is aware of the Talmud. There's some things in there, but that gets into text criticism that I'm not going to get into today. But Mr. Monster, thank you for that. I appreciate your clarification.
I will say that the people that lots of anti-Semites will quote fake stuff from the Talmud. They'll quote things that actually aren't even in the Talmud and then claim that it's actually like, all these dreadful things.
Wow.
Are in the Talmud. I'm like, there's these long lists that you can find online, and I'm like, that's not even a book in the Talmud. So I'm like, again, it's one of those things where I'm like, look, if you're going to go against the Talmud, fine. Like, I have lots of beef with things in the Talmud, but just quote the damn thing.
Right.
Like quote it in Hebrew, quote it in Aramaic. I think one of the anti-Semites in the chat actually said something like, so blah, 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 the Talmud is a Hebrew. I'm like, it is in Hebrew. I'm like, the Talmud's in Aramaic. Like, if you're going to criticize it, be smart.
Know what you're talking about.
Know what you're talking about. Like, don't make stupid mistakes. Like, not knowing the Talmud is actually not in that line. It's like saying like that you don't know that the Bible's written in Hebrew. Like, just be. If you're gonna be a bigot, at least be smart.
Doc Floromanot, thank you for the super chat. Always sharp here. Pre-war Hakalats were issued ending accepting gifts from non-Jews. Is this a possible cause of a badtude in Jerusalem to Paul's church connections? And why then did he himself go, thus sealing his fate?
I'm not sure.
Holocaust.
Halachot?
Pre-war.
Like halachot, like laws? Like, because there was no settled halacha at that time. The halacha doesn't get settled to the 16th century, really. That's what the Talmud's trying to do in a lot of ways.
So I think remember when Paul says, remember the poor, like he's making a kind of a contract with Peter and James on
right. That's what the early church called themselves, the Ebionim, the poor.
Right. And it's like accepting a gift from non-Jews. But remember, Paul's having to go to these non-Jews to get this money.
Yeah, well, and
you kind of wonder.
He gets in a bit of worry, a bit of worry about how much of that money he's transferring correctly. Could you believe that there could be institutional shenanigans about money in the early church?
No way.
It's possible.
It's inerrant and infallible, but go ahead.
But yeah, it could be. I mean, I think there was bad blood between James and Paul, between the Peter and James and Paul the whole time. And I think, honest to God, if the Bar Kokhba rebellion had never happened, we would just have two fundamentally different groups of Christians. There would have been this Gentile church. There would have been this Jewish church.
I have a hard time knowing how. I'm not gonna say it wouldn't survive. I just don't know how it would be nothing. Like, it'd be so small, and like it'd be like this. Well, maybe kind of like maybe not even like the Samaritans today. I mean, they're less than 800. I just interviewed a modern day Samaritan the other day, and I'm thinking to myself, he's the son of the high priest on Mount Gerizim. Actually.
Yeah, they're a fascinating group. I mean, a big problem with their birth rate. It's not birth rates; it's the laws around incest that make it so difficult, and you can't convert in. And that's also
women. They can though. They can.
Yeah, women. They will allow. Yeah, they will allow, and that's recent too. By the way,
they've had Ukrainian women actually coming in now. So
yeah, that's totally recent that they allow for that. Also, maybe just point this out too. That's also interesting about sort of this whole business about Jews being inherently supremacists or something like that. What's interesting about Israelite religion is there's very little evidence of conversion in. There's just a famous story of Ruth, right? Mm-hmm. The rabbis instituted the reality of conversion, which tells you that it can't be that from a theological point of view that Judaism is inherently ethnically supremacist.
Right.
Because you can convert in.
Not saying there weren't Jews that definitely did have limits and say that non-Jews couldn't join, because rabbis, there were arguments.
There definitely were arguments, but the ultimate position was, of course, people can convert in.
Right.
And so I think that's, again, just shows you that we're not dealing with a racial idea, right? Because Judaism is interesting in that, right? That we're not dealing with
it's not genealogical only now.
Yeah, no, it's not genealogical. It's not racial. It's not ethnic completely. it is theological, and therefore that's the ability to convert in. But unfortunately, you can't really convert out. You're ethnic. If you're born ethnically Jewish, then you're stuck.
Where's that book? Here it is. This book, I swear on this book, for anyone who wants to know the real history, like what happened in the Roman Empire before Christianity hit. Cattell Berthelot got the Jewish award-winning whatever. This book, like, quotes, shows you sources, the whole nine, about Jews and their Roman rivals, not their Christian Romans, pre-Christian, and what was happening and how Rome itself. See, let me give just a teaser. I think this is necessary in the vein of our discussion, because when the whole, I'm not saying there isn't supremacy there. Sure, of course there is these ideas that rabbis have, and it is in the text, the idea that we are this race that's going to, rule the world ideas. In some of these texts, that's there. However, keep in mind, the Bible itself doesn't agree with the Bible. There are changes that happen over time. And in Second Temple Judaism, there's a change happening from Persia, Babylon onward. When you get into the Greek world and their city-states, she goes into that in this book and talks about how the Jews were impacted by the Greek world. But then the Roman world comes on. Even the Greeks, there were Greek philosophers who wrote and said, Rome is going to rule the world. Like, Rome has the best setup, legal-wise, on they would even forgive their enemies that were fighting against them in battle and make them citizens. Now, the way Romans looked at citizens and citizenship to become a Roman, the way that Jews look at citizenship to become part of their religion. So they started to mimic how the Romans adopt and the adoption concepts and how people could come in and conversion and stuff to become a Roman citizen, because it's not just a religion. This is the complexity about Judaism. It's not just theological. It's also kind of a nation state.
Right.
And so it's a far more complex thing. And seeing that change take place through the Roman Empire before Christianity on the scene, it makes you realize the porous boundary between Jew and non-Jew, even though there were definite Jews that had kind of like a, God, I thank you, I was not born a goy.
Right.
Then
and that's in the Orthodox prayer book, that is in there.
Right.
And in progressive Judaism, including the movement that I belong to, the Reconstructionist movement, we've removed it.
Right.
We removed all that stuff because we don't want to be Jewish supremacists. And so we removed that material. But the Jews of that time, and this is the reason why there are still Jews left. They were willing to adapt. And they were learning from the Romans. The Romans were like, this is a really great system for inclusivity.
Exactly.
And they sort of live and let live. And again, part of what makes, I think, one of the genius of Judaism is its ability to adapt. Like, yeah, so our temple's destroyed. Let's sort that out, right? We could just go extinct, but we could also say, yeah, I don't think that that's the end all be all. And that's a great period. And Christianity is also really great at this. It's often religions that have no adaptable structure like that often go extinct.
Right.
If for instance, if your religion is completely tied to a land, it's really hard to leave, or deal with war or something. So, but yeah, I think that Judaism has a responsibility to adapt to ethical modernity. And I think all of that, who didn't make me a goy or who didn't make me a woman, is also right there.
That was it. I didn't finish the quote. But
it's also, that's also a crap philosophy. Havdalah also has the prayer, who separates the Jew from the Gentile. We kicked back to the curb. And I would say that all Jewish people have an obligation to look at their tradition and to take a look at ethical modernity and decide for themselves. Is this lining up with our ethical values? Because I do believe in ethical progress, and I don't believe that medieval people and ancient Iron Age people are the moral barometer that I want to be basing my life on.
And we aren't either. At some point in the future, I hope that we will progress and look back and go, that thing? Yeah, we're not doing that anymore. And
the way we treat animals now, like non-human animals, there's been moral progress in that stuff, and there's going to continue to be moral progress. I mean, think about the way our kids are going to talk about the way we treated the environment. What the hell were you doing? And again, I look back at my medieval Jews and think, ugh, come on, Maimonides. But I don't also expect people. Also, I don't believe in canceling these people, right? I think there's also the opposite reaction where people are like, oh, that's problematic. Let's cancel it. I'm like, no, tradition has to be dealt with, warts and all. And I look at the tradition and I say, this is what Shimon Bar Yochai said. This is what the Vilna Gaon said. This is what these people said. And I'm like, yeah, the Vilna Gaon, you're a real genius. And all that anti-Jewish, all that anti-Gentile stuff is trash. And we're going to keep it because we don't cancel you. but we learn from your genius about how to keep our traditions continuing, and also how to change our traditions because we think those parts of it are trash.
I mean, if we're going to be honest, looking throughout the Hebrew Bible, and then I want to move on, is just to make sure we can get everybody, is you're going to find passages where the nations, the ethne, if you're looking at the Septuagint, or if you're looking at the Hebrew, the Goyim, you're going to find absolutely they can't stand them. And God is even speaking times saying like, screw these uncircumcised, blah, blah, blah. Oh, yeah. But then you'll find places that are optimistic in the Bible, the same canon of scripture, where they are in positive light, and God wants to restore them. Look at Jonah, right? There, it seems very late second century or Second Temple Judaism is already doing this. And here's Jonah already painting a picture where he doesn't even want to go to them. He can't stand them for the things they've done to Israel.
No, right. It's even I think, more powerful than that. The writer of that text knew the Assyrians had destroyed the northern tribes.
Right. And he's like, screw them. I hate them.
Yeah, I hate them. And God's like, too bad. Like,
too bad. I love them and I want to help them. And so it's pick and choose, but
exactly. And I think that this is the thing, is when we get to this idea that there's a monolithic thing called Judaism and they all believe X, whatever that X is, I'm like, that's just not true. That's objectively impossible, actually. It's objectively impossible. Now, the question is, are there dreadful ideas in these texts? The Hebrew Bible, the Torah, the Talmud, the Zohar? Sure. And I think it's that Jews have an ethical obligation, like Muslims and Christians and Buddhists, to go to their traditions and to always be in the process of evaluating the past and their traditions of the past in light of moral progress.
Is it fair also to include those who want to let it go altogether? And
sure. I think that's totally reasonable.
That's my position. Is it's for me. I find it not necessary,
right.
Though I do live and let live. I think it's necessary to figure out ways to live with people who do want to hold on to the traditions. I think that's like, let's be human beings and love each other. So
yeah.
I just want to mention,
and secular people can also be capable of horrifying violence.
For sure.
Yeah. I mean, Stalinism and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Religious people have there's no monopoly on bad behavior in religion. And I would say that, secular people inherit traditions. And
I don't. I'm like the Christ of secular people. So like
completely tradition free. And so I think that it's absolutely imperative to take a look at whatever traditions we inherit. I think there are secular traditions, and think about those and be like, hold on, like maybe the way that we treat non-human animals or the environment's crappy, and we need to change things.
Right. No More Religion. Adam Green, he has a YouTube channel where he is doing critical responses to Judaism, and he is wanting to point out these bad things. He said, come on my show and show me what's out of context.
I never said anything was out of context.
No, he's talking about that. You know how you said earlier, like historical context? Like,
right. So I'll give
things out of context.
Right. I'll give an example, right? Shimon Bar Yochai. Let's take the worst offender, right? The worst offender. That's that quote from earlier that basically the only good Jew is the only good Gentile is a dead one. Let's just take that quote, right? So we can take that quote and when we can say, look, it's one person saying it, right? And it's only in the Jerusalem Talmud, basically. It doesn't get repeated in the Babylonian Talmud. They even change it later. The quotation gets changed because rabbis were uncomfortable with it. And Shimon Bar Yochai was, in many ways, a fringe figure, even in his own day, right? He was a fringe figure. So there's all that. But also, let's put ourselves in Shimon Bar Yochai's situation. He is living in the remains of post-Bar Kokhba Judea, where the Romans have not only colonized that part of the world for centuries, but destroyed the temple and murdered hundreds of thousands of Jews. Just genocidal violence, right? Straight up genocidal violence. On top of that, they've murdered his teacher, Akiva. They wrapped him in a Torah scroll and burned him alive after flaying him alive, right?
Not saying what he said is good, but
right, exactly.
It's like pretending Native Americans have nothing negative to say or hate
exactly
the colonizers who come over and annihilate and rape and do everything you can under the sun.
So it's important, right, to point out, right? I'm saying we can understand and explain Shimon Bar Yochai's bigotry, and it never justifies it.
Right.
Never. Right. We can understand why Shimon Bar Yochai would say something like that. And I think it's really important that when anti-Semites quote him out of context, they don't care to give any of the historical context about why he might have said something like that. And then they say, oh, well, it's all Jews believe that. Or they say, like, this is what Jews believe, and here's what Shimon Bar Yochai said, which is ironic because today's the anniversary of his death. It's his yahrzeit.
Today?
Yeah, it's funny because Lag BaOmer is a big mystical holiday. So he has this really weird he has this weird extreme representation in Judaism where people praise his saintliness, but he never had like a decisive impact in some ways.
Mhm.
The rabbis at the time were very uncomfortable with him. And it's important to know the historical context of what these people are saying. If I'm living in 1940s Germany and I'm a Jewish person, and I'm like, you expect me to have a really positive outlook on Germans?
You're going to hate them.
And it would not be unreasonable, right?
Right.
But it would be wrong.
That's the hard part. Would I think it was wrong? Honestly, I don't think I would at the time. I think it would be the necessary thing at the time. So if I could put myself in the shoes, the problem is, and I'd love to know if there's some follow-ups, are there modern Jews at synagogues that are quoting this guy and using his literature in contemporary context?
Oh, no, there are absolutely modern Haredi Jews, other Jews that will quote that and mean it.
And that's what I think Adam's aiming at.
And they're doing the exact wrong thing that I'm also saying anti-Semites do.
Right.
They're taking it out of context and then using it as a way of justifying their own bigotry. And I don't care if you're an anti-Semite. I don't care if you're a Haredi Jew in Mesharim. If you're using that quote by Shimon Bar Yochai to justify anti-Gentile bigotry, then like miss me on that. Like, just like, it's not like you cannot believe that and also believe that every single human being in this world is made B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God. Pick. Be a Jewish bigot if you want to be, or adopt what the Torah says, which is every human being is made in B'Tselem Elohim, in the image of God, but it can't be both.
Right.
And I think that
people who think, yeah.
So
there are Jews who say that, and Adam's had Jews, rabbis, like in synagogues, quoting like the Gentiles weren't even born from; they were born of like
they're animals, that they're animals, or that they don't have a complete soul, that they lack a part of their soul. Yeah, that stuff is all there, and it's all bad. All that stuff is bad, and again, if I were to go to the Protestant library and go to John Calvin and Martin Luther and all these people, could I find a bunch of anti-Semitic stuff in the Protestant canon, the Catholic canon? Right? There's stuff in Islam that says, hey, there's a Jew hiding behind this rock, come and cut his throat. That's in a hadith. Now, if ISIS wants to quote that, they can do that and basically justify murdering Jews.
They do.
They do. And so did Protestants and so did whatever. Jews can quote this stuff and justify all kinds of other bad stuff that they want to do. I'm saying they're all wrong.
Mm-hmm.
All of them.
Thank you so much. Man, I'm having a blast. I hope you are too.
Yeah.
Read between the lines. Thank you for the super chat. Good to see you here. It's been a while. Churches are implicated. Read Luther's On the Jews and Their Lies. It was Hitler's guidebook.
Yeah, we mentioned it earlier. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, Hitler thought it was so good, he just reprinted it.
And he said, screwed up the super chat. Sorry.
Yeah. So Hitler just reprinted On the Jews and Their Lies. Which again, it's a dreadful book. Now, am I going to go to all Protestants and all Lutherans and be like, your dude wrote this and you're all anti-Semites? Oh, my sister-in-law is a Lutheran. Like, come on.
Right.
Like I'm not like, that's just, it's intellectually dishonest is what it is.
Thank you. Zach Lightcap, thank you for the super chat. Shiloh is a Gentile. Genesis 49:10. Scepter power passed from between the feet of Judah, and a global power balance between the Davidic covenant and Dr. Leland Jensen, a deceased Baha'i claiming to be said Shiloh and seventh angel. Hold on. I may have misread this here. They're suggesting, I think, that this person... Let me see this. Scepter power passed from between the feet of Judah, a global power balance between the Davidic covenant and Dr. Leland Jensen, a deceased Baha'i claiming to be said. Maybe this is just a statement. Shiloh is a Gentile.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, there is, I can guess that there's a section in Tractate Sanhedrin and the Talmud where they do talk about, where they do attempt to guess at the name of the Messiah, and Shiloh is one of the names they guess at. Shiloh. So I don't know what this is. I'm not sure what this is referring to. Sorry.
Interesting.
Yeah, if you clarified a little more, maybe. But some people, there are some rabbinic sources that say the name of the Messiah will be Shiloh, but there's 50 different other guesses too.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Zach. Sorry if we didn't answer it completely or get deep into it. Thank you for the super chat, though. I really appreciate it. Dan Jacobs says secular anti-Sem USSR Nazis imported from Christianity.
Yeah, I agree. that the anti-Semitism of the Soviet Union and Nazism would have been unimaginable without the backdrop of the anti-Judaism of Christianity. Sure.
Wow. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. Doc Pluralmanaut's back. What are we to make of Jesus' condemnation of the, what is this, the Eudoia,
Eudoia, the Jews. Yeah, it's just,
Yeah.
it needs a definite article in front. Ho Yehudoi is what to complete the Greek phrase grammatically.
In John 8:44, is ethnicity a helpful framework for understanding proto-racism or anti-Semitism in the 1st century CE?
Yeah, I think that there is a transition, and we talked about this earlier, both in Matthew and in John, where you do get this sort of corporate guilt model.
Right.
And I do think that that's reflecting the kind of attitudes that were developing in the early church. And unfortunately, because those books became gospel, they became in the inerrant word of God. And the temporality and the historical context of how they developed was basically lost or ignored or both. And so I think that, like, I wouldn't think about it as proto-racism. I think racism actually doesn't really even begin to exist until the 18th century. I think it's a relatively recent phenomenon, all things told, which actually gives me hope, by the way, that it can be destroyed, that racism can be wiped out, considering it's, basically still relatively young. But I think that these kinds of ideas in the Gospels do lay the foundation for what will become anti-Judaism and therefore anti-Semitism. I don't think that's Christianity's destiny, though. I don't think that's Christianity's destiny, and I don't think it's inherent that Christianity is sort of inherently anti-Semitic, or Christianity is inherently anti-Jewish or anti-Judaic. I think that what we have are the conditions for these things, and when bigots, religious bigots or ethnic bigots or both, wanted to latch onto it, they had the ammunition there. But it's also the case that, again, it depends on which Jesus you want to quote, right? I mean, blessed are the peacemakers. Like, you can pick a Jesus. You can do blessed are the peacemakers, or you can do, like, the Jews are responsible for all the bad things in the world. And I think both of those options are available to a Christian, and it depends on what the Christian ultimately wants to do with that. I mean, I think of scriptures, Derek, kind of like a palette of paint, right? There are lots of things in there, and some of the colors are really garish and bad. And it's up to every generation and every individual to figure out how they're gonna paint with those colors. And if you're a bigoted person and you want to go to the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament or the Quran or whatever, and you want to paint a bigoted picture, it's there for you. And if you don't, you can actively not do that. And just because the tradition has painted a bigoted picture doesn't mean that you have to do it too. And again, I think that's when people use tradition as an excuse not to think, not to change, not to adapt. That, to me, that is just intellectually and I would say spiritually lazy. So,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, I just don't have a lot of respect for people that were like, well, the tradition says. I'm like, yeah, tradition says a lot of stuff, a lot of good and a lot of bad. And you have to take the responsibility, and your communities have to take the responsibility to correcting that stuff. And that's why I belong to the movement of Judaism that I do, because it intentionally changed the prayer book because it was racist. That's what you got to do. That's what you got to do.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad to hear you doing that. If you're going to do it, you might as well. I'm glad to see that you're in a camp that's trying to do that. Whereas for me, right, I'm looking at it and I guess I've figured out what works for me in life, and it's like, I want to call out what I think is bad and try to get people to say, hey, this is no good, and see what's good. And maybe we could still use it, and let's roll with the punches.
Sure. Yeah,
D. Bordeaux, thank you for the super chat. Can your guest explain the differences between the Torah, Talmud, and Mishnah, please? Do you have 10 hours?
Yeah, I can do it really fast. All right, so the
Okay.
Torah is the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible or the Old Testament. It's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Right, that's the first part of Tanakh, which includes the writings of the prophets. So that's the Hebrew Bible or the Christian Old Testament. The Talmud is actually a commentary on the Mishnah. So the Mishnah was written down because Jews were basically facing an existential crisis in the aftermath of the Great Rebellion. They had basically the Romans destroyed the temple and were massacring Jews and Jewish leadership. The Jewish leadership was terrified that basically the entire religious authority system would be massacred. There was good reason to believe that was possible. And so all of the things that were previously kept oral were written down. Now, the text that got written down is called the Mishnah. It's all the oral stuff, and the Mishnah is still not enough. And so rabbis, a couple generations later, both in the Galilee and the Sasanian Empire, wrote commentaries on it. And the commentaries on the Mishnah are the Talmud. And then there are also commentaries on commentaries on commentaries, and this is going on and on. So sometimes people think the Talmud is a commentary on the Hebrew Bible, but it's not. It's not what it is.
Thank you so much, D. Thank you for the super chat. I do hope that we answered your question, but there's a lot. I mean, my buddy Dan.
And you can read all three of these online at Sefaria, right? You can read the Talmud, the Torah. You can read both Talmuds, the Jerusalem and the Babylonian Talmud and the Mishnah online at Sefaria. So if you want to dip your feet into this literature, it's there in both Hebrew, Aramaic, and English.
And there is a lot of complex things to understand how they're like decoding what rabbis are saying and what they mean is a very difficult process as well without entering that world. There's a lot behind it. So thank you for the question, though. Seriously. Yep. Dan Jacobs back in the house. Thank you again. When I was Orthodox Jew, birth 30, I was always taught chosen meant chosen for a mission, a mitzvah, not better than others.
Yeah, there's a lot of interpretations of what being the chosen people means, right? So one version of it is, the bigoted version of it is, God chose the Israelites, and the Israelites are therefore better than everybody else. That's one narrative that gets told in the tradition. Another narrative is that the Jews were actually chosen last. I like this myth, this legend, that where God actually shopped the Torah around to every other nation, and every other nation didn't want it. So they got the Jews were like the last. They're like, well, God's like, crap, these people. So even like, it's funny because even that story sort of it's like self-deprecating humor. I really like that. Some version of the chosen stuff goes that God chose the Israelites and then gave them a bunch of work to do. And so it's actually more of a hassle than anything else. And so this is a specific mission that they get chosen for. There's lots of variations on this whole chosen people business. The movement I belong to has rejected the idea as inherently ethnocentric. That theologically that God has picked one group of people to be special is just an untenable ethnocentric idea, and it has to be abandoned. So, for instance, if you come to a Reconstructionist service, when we read from the Torah, there's a specific part of reading the blessing for reading the Torah where it says, and God gave the Jews the Torah to separate them off from the other nations, to make them holy from the other nations. We just cut that out. It's just not appropriate. It's
what do you say about the no true Scotsman fallacy, where they say you're not a real Jew? And I'm sure you get that a lot. And then there are other Jews who want to say the other Jews aren't real Jews because of this and stuff.
I'm telling you, you guys have fun with that.
You're outside. You don't even like. You don't care to have these disputes, and I don't blame you.
I mean, if someone wants to come and say, or these Haredi Jews want to come and say you're not really a Jew, or where you're practicing Judaism wrong, I'm like, yeah, and I'm pretty sure the ancient Israelites would have like had you massacred for not being a true Yahwist or whatever. I think that when we get into these things, Jewish communities have to set their own standards and produce their own literature. And to imagine that somehow you've inherited everything from Mount Sinai completely intact and haven't changed a word of it, and you're doing exactly what they did, blah, 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 that's delusional, right? Every generation has to adapt and reconstruct whatever religion that they belong to, period. That just has to happen. And so the idea that you're preserving an untouched religion reaching back for centuries and millennia, that's just delusional. I mean, and so if they want to come at me and say, oh, you changed the blessings, I'm like, a bunch of rabbis wrote these blessings down 2,000 years ago. They made it up.
Right.
Like why am I going to like kowtow to that? Now I'm going to let the tradition be the tradition.
Yeah.
Right. But I'm also going to go to it and say we have to subject this stuff to criticism.
I love that. I just did an episode on Jubilees. Mm-hmm. You don't want to miss it. I swear, join the Patreon. It's going to be early access. Like, this is my no shame plug here, just to tell you, it is in the vein of this, what Dr. Sledge is talking about right now. So, except it's not just tradition and like the Talmud, the Bible, like what the Talmud does with Genesis and Exodus tells you a fixed canon in the Jewish mind. Like, come on, man. That's anachronistic. So there's so much stuff.
Yeah. It's just not the way Judaism works. Yeah.
Right. RG1 says, how much do you think Jews charging non-Jews interest contributed to bigotry? Check out Black Braid if you haven't. New Native American black metal band.
Interesting. Yeah, I have to check them out. There's a lot of check them out. Yeah, of course, the ability of so it's a mixed bag, right? That non-Jews being able to charge Jews interest has led to a lot of problems. It also led to one of the major boons in the economy of the medieval world. There's a reason why Gentiles wanted Jews living in their cities, in ghettos, of course, but they wanted them there because you cannot have a functioning economy without debt. You have to have it. And speaking of changing traditions, by the way, Jews shouldn't be charging other Jews interest, but Hillel came up with this idea of the prose bull and basically made it so they could. It just changed the Bible, basically.
Right.
So people who come along and say, oh, you can't change things, whatever. Hillel changed it. So so you get these situations where you have Jews lending money, and this can lead to problems. That's also what happened to the Templars, right? If you want a lesson for that, the Templars had these international banks, and the king of France went heavily into debt to the Templars, and so rather than pay them back, he just said they're all gay devil worshippers and just killed them all.
Oh my gosh.
And so this is just Shylock stuff and all these other things. So again, it's one of these situations where the European non-Jews needed the Jews to basically kickstart their economy, and who here likes to be in debt to somebody? Yeah, nobody. So if you are in debt to a group of people and they're a minority and you have them already locked inside of a ghetto, it doesn't take a lot of smarts to realize you could just kill those people to get rid of the debt. And that happened. That happened. And again, you get this double-edged sword when it comes to anti-Semitism, where you have this idea that the Jews are money grubbing and they're rich. And that comes from the money lending thing. And also you get the same exact opposite idea. Oh, they're all poor and they're a drain on the economy. Well, pick. Right? Like, you can't have these contradictory stereotypes. But
do you think so? In effect, it may have contributed to some bigotry, I suspect.
Yeah, it's some, but this is also mostly a much later 15th century thing. And it really localized primarily in places like Italy, where you get the kind of banking system. I mean, the word banchi, comes from the money changers in the Medici period. So it's a much later thing, but it does contribute. Yeah, it does contribute.
Thank you so much. No More Religion says, all my Talmud and Zohar were from Sephara.
Yeah, man. You're knocking on the open door, brother. I know they are. Like, you can quote the Talmud and the Zohar all day long and show me how. Trust me, I know those sections are bad because I literally teach them and how they're bad on my channel. I had a whole thing about how the Zohar has all kinds of anti-Gentile stuff when I taught my intro to Kabbalah class. So you're knocking on the open door. I'm totally willing to be honest about the negative stuff that's in the Talmud, the Zohar, all that stuff. So again, I think we have to use, historical context is very important, and also it can explains why there are these sentiments, and also it's really important to be like, this is the historical circumstance, and that doesn't justify it. It doesn't justify it.
Thank you. No More News. William Ahrens, isn't a real example of a replacement theory that of Christianity? And by the way, let me stop the banner here. We got to wrap things up here shortly. Isn't a real example of a replacement theory that a Christianity in general and certain Christian sects in particular claiming the title of the chosen people of God, and has Islam done the same?
I guess. I mean, this is sort of the great replacement theory that's pretty common among anti-Semites, and unfortunately inspired this horrifying shooting in Buffalo. Yeah, and this is also where this anti-Semitism stuff, we should just never forget that this has real world impact. People walk into synagogues and shoot people because they believe this insanity.
So hold on, the guy that I didn't read up any further, other than I know it was some Caucasian guy up in Buffalo that shot like 10 to 12 people in the grocery store. Did they find out what was motivating him?
Yeah, he's a believer in the great replacement theory.
Really?
He's anti-Semite and stuff too. Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah, I read through his 180 long page screed. I feel like it's important just to have some sense of these things. But yeah, he's a Nazi of some stripe, like Anders Breivik and these kind of people. Which again, that's what I worry. It's like getting people like, oh, the Jews secretly control things. Like, that's a conspiracy theory that's just objectively not true. But believing in that Jews do that does cause people
like that.
Yeah, creates people like that that walk into synagogues and shoot people. And trust me, there are bad actors in Judaism as well. Baruch Goldstein, may his name be blotted out, walked into a mosque at Hebron and killed a bunch of people. I made it when I went to Hebron, I made it my pilgrimage to go spit on his grave. So yeah, trust me, they're Jewish bad actors too. Although I would say that in that case, where you see a lot more anti-Semites doing that kind of stuff than we do Jewish people. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to wade into the waters of the great replacement theories because I'm not a sociologist or whatever. But if I was anything to say, I think anytime you get into this entitlement, theological or ethnic entitlement, that you have a moral right simply because you belong to a group or believe something, you're just wrong. Like, it doesn't matter what group you belong to, and it doesn't matter what you believe. Ethical obligations are universally binding on everybody, regardless of that stuff. And so I think that part of the great claim of doing ethics in general is that if it's not universal, it's just not ethics. And if anyone gets to be the exception to the rule because they belong to an ethnic group or a religious group, I think that's inherently unethical by definition.
Yeah.
By definition. So, yeah, I think that when you claim that you're chosen people and you can do what you want, or when you claim that you're the chosen people and you can take these people's land, or you're, when they, like, yeah, or we can just do whatever we want because we believe in this, right? Like when they killed all the Cathar people allegedly at the massacre at Béziers, right? Famously, the Crusader leader said, "Kill them all. God will know His own."
Wow.
Yeah, it's just like no, like that, no. And so we have to stand firmly against that. And I'm dedicated to keeping my side of the street clean when it comes to being around Jewish people and being community of Jewish people. And when I hear Haredi people, Orthodox people say bigoted stuff, I call it out. And I think every group of people has a dedication to keeping their side of the street clean.
I hope more people follow in your footsteps, for real, man. Like, you're a good example. So thank you for that. Bradford Baldwin, are there any writings post-Hebrew Bible that pick up from where it left off and are written with the same providence of the Hebrew Bible?
Sure. There's a whole bunch. I mean, the people writing the Hebrew Bible didn't know they were writing the Hebrew Bible. They were just writing stuff. people later put it together and called it, whatever. Yeah, there are tons of texts written during the apocalyptic period that were authoritative to some degree. The Book of Enoch. I mean, there are more copies of the Book of Enoch than many copies of the Torah found in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Whoever that community felt that the Book of Enoch was authoritative. So I would say that there are tons of books that are at some level or authoritative or not that continue to be written. And again, also you have to understand that the Jewish canon isn't closed in quite the same way that the Christian canon is. And there's not just one Christian canon. The Ethiopic Bible has dozens of more books than the Protestant one does. The Catholic one has 7 more. And so it's important to know that canons are weird things. They're more elastic than people think they are. And the Jewish canon continues to accept new text into it that are authoritative up to this day. So
thank you for that. I did not know the answer for sure on that one. Bradford Baldwin, I appreciate you on the massive super chat, my friend.
Yeah, that's very kind.
Vision Plan, thank you for another big super chat as well. The ancient Yemeni king, what is this, Abakirib? Assad converted to Judaism and struggled against polytheism. There's also evidence that Jewish converts in Western Arabia were regarded as Jews by other Jews, as well as by non-Jews. Interesting.
Yeah, there's been lots of cases in history where you have population centers of people converting. There's one in Colombia. I just watching today. Yeah, there's a whole town in Colombia that converted to Judaism. Wow. They just like as a community started studying Judaism. They're like, yeah, this is for us, and they just converted the whole community. And this happens from time to time. I can't imagine why anyone would want to do that. It just makes your life a lot more complicated. But people do it. But yeah, you have lots of communities. A famous example of the Khazars or whatever. Some of those folks converted at some point as well, which also is part of the anti-Semitic conspiracy theory that all European Jews are not really Jews; they're Khazars.
Yeah, I've heard that. That's probably opening up a can of worms and a rabbit trail. I would be glad because I know a group that I came out of full preterists that believe that the second coming of Jesus happened, but what is meant by it might be, there's different interpretations, but it happened in 70 AD. They think the second coming happened. And they think after 70, God's chosen, the elect remnant of whoever they might have been was taken. Some think that the story ended, and technically the religion of Judaism ended at the destruction of the temple. Therefore, there is no real Jew after 70 AD. They literally say that. So they literally not only say Christianity is fake because after 70, Jesus already returned. The end happened. So there's a lot of what they call faux Christians. They don't just do it to Christians. They say Jews are faux Jews. So there is no real Jew. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this goes down another rabbit trail that can cause anti-Semitic like sentimency. And like
the fake Jew stuff. Yeah, I get that a lot. Like, oh, European Jews aren't real Jews. I'm like, all right, well, whatever. God,
yeah. Well, you can't prove your genealogy, and it once again just shows that they're not aware that there's at least 3 conceptions of entering the Jewish community, and it's not just genealogical in antiquity. I mean, like way back, So anyway, thank you for that, Alan Bird. Can Justin comment between the difference between opposition to Israel's treatment of Palestinians and anti-Semitism, and when the former crosses over into the latter? Alan, thank you for your super chat. Thank you for sticking around, my friend. Appreciate it.
So I would say, I think I said this earlier, criticizing the state of Israel is criticizing a country. Like, you should be able to criticize any country in the world. I don't care what country it is. And anyone who says that you can't criticize Israel for the way it treats Palestinian people because they're just a Jewish country, that's just garbage, wrong logic. Like, I've been to the Palestinian territories as part of the Jewish Center for Nonviolence, and I've defended Palestinian farms from being taken by settlers, right? And I've had the idea of point guns at the group of people we were with, right? So I've seen it, and I'm not about it.
They were called. Do you mind? This was our private talk, but can you don't say what they said, but give us an idea of the things that they were saying while they're pointing their AK-47s at you?
Well, not AK-47, the Galils, I think so, but they had.
I thought there was like some assault rifle. Or something.
Some kind of some rifle. Yeah, it's just screaming at us in Hebrew, and then they realized that a lot of us were Jews, and they're just screaming all kinds of obscenities and stuff. I'm not going to repeat it, but yeah, for me, that it's occupying people's land, taking their land is not part of my Judaism. Just not going to do that, and so I've been there. Like, I've seen it, and I think that human rights abuses just have to be called out. And I don't care if Jewish people are doing them. I'm not, and especially I feel a special onus on me, and my community feels a special onus to be like, look, you can't do the violence against Palestinian people and then claim you're doing it on behalf of us, because you're not, right? Not in our name. So yeah, I think that when politicians or people committed to the cause of Zionism of some stretch use basically being Jewish as cover for not having to deal with real criticism of human rights violations, that's not good. It's morally repugnant. It's morally repugnant. So yeah, I'm not about that. I think it's important that we maintain our dedication to human rights. And if it happens to be that the Jewish nation is doing human rights violations, it should be called out by the international community, and it is. And it is also by other Jews, right? If not now, the Jewish Center for Nonviolence. It's not like, again, this is not a monolithic thing,
right?
And I think it's important to keep people ethical.
Alan, thank you, my friend. All right, we got to hurry up here, everybody. No more super chats, please. Thank you, Greg, Derek. Thank you for everything you do, bro. Awesome and inspiring guest. I became an atheist because I grew up in a very Catholic and very anti-Semitic family. Anti-Semitism was everywhere. It was hateful and repulsive. Wow. Thank you for the super chat, Greg.
Yeah. I'm sorry that you grew up in a family like that, and I'm glad that you've gotten away from those beliefs. Anti-Semitism is poison, just the same way Jewish supremacism is poison.
In my upbringing, we didn't have that problem. Where I was born and raised, it was an issue between blacks and whites.
Yeah.
So
that too.
Everybody has what I'm saying?
Anti-black racism in the Jewish community is very real.
Oh, wow.
I mean, I got into literal fisticuffs with when I was in yeshiva, right, studying Orthodox yeshiva in Brooklyn. I got tired of hearing it, right? They'll code it, right? So they'll say, they don't say the N-word, they say Schwarzer, which is just the Yiddish version of the N-word. Oh. And I called a dude out on it. I was like, hey man, like, I understand Yiddish a little bit. I'm not with that. Like, don't do that. Like, don't do that. He did it again. And I was like, all right, bro, we had to go outside. Like, I come from Mississippi, like, where the civil rights movement, like, my synagogue was bombed in the civil rights movement by the Klan.
Wow.
Like I'm about civil rights and I'm about Jews. Like, Abraham Joshua Heschel said that when he marched with Martin Luther King Jr., he was praying with his feet. Like, I'm about that life, that praying with your feet life, like being on the right side of this stuff. And I'm not going to take it from Jewish people who have no excuse, who have been systematically persecuted through history. Like, you know what it's like to be on the receiving end of bigotry. Like, you have no excuse for the anti-black racism stuff. And
or any
racism. But, you know, I heard it there. It's like, you know, this Schwarzer stuff. I'm like, no, dude, like, we have to go outside and talk about this. Because you cannot be telling me, again, that people are made in the image of God and then denigrating them because of the color of their skin. Not having it.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, like, I didn't have the issue growing up with Jews. It was a black and white issue where I grew up, and you have to figure out what the right thing to do is and how to properly treat humans and view people. There's so much. Crossover Maniac, thank you for the super chat. Isn't it true that the Jesus in the Talmud, Jesus of Pentheus, was born a century before the Jesus of the Gospels?
Yeah, there's a lot of debate about the character Yeshu in the Talmud, where it's famously said that Yeshu is being boiled in his own excrement in Gehenna, which is a great image. That's so gross. Yeah, so gross. There's a lot of debate about who this Yeshu character is. One argument that it is Jesus, and they're just making fun of Jesus in the Talmud, and that's one possibility. I think it's possibly possible. There's good arguments also that this character is a pre-BCE character that's not Jesus. There's other arguments say that they made it look like that so they don't get criticized for making fun of Jesus or whatever. I think it's all mixed up together. I think that there's a bunch of mixed up weird editing there. And we also get the Toledot Yeshu, which is sort of this really scandalous book written about Jesus' mother and stuff. That's written a good bit later after the Talmud. No one knows. But what matters, though, is that if Jewish people want to go to the Talmud or the Toledot Yeshu and use that as a way of making fun of someone else's or denigrating someone else's deeply held religious beliefs, that's morally wrong. And I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to denigrate someone's religious beliefs. And I think that insofar as that stuff is in the Talmud, then we name it and we say, look, it's not good to denigrate people's religious beliefs, to make fun of Jesus or to say things like that about him. Yeah, so it's in there, and the Toledot Yeshu is in there, and I also will say this: there's a lot of rabbis who hated that book because Christians, anti-Jewish Christians, could use it as excuses to do all kinds of violence, and there were many rabbis in the Middle Ages that said this is a forgery, and it didn't really matter, but even then they knew it was a forgery, and they didn't like it. So.
Thank you so much for that. Crossover says, is Numbers 5:11-31 an example of an abortion?
I had to pull it up. I didn't know how the whole
I think,
Torah.
isn't this that text where they're drinking wormwood or something? The text, like in Hebrew, we don't even know what the word means, I think. I might be mistaken.
I guess we can pull it up on Safari real fast. Or it's the one where she like grabs his balls and he like hits her, and then it causes a spontaneous abortion.
It says, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, speak to the people of Israel. If any man's wife goes astray and breaks faith with him, if a man lies
this
with
is a sotah. This is a sotah ritual.
So this is that one where they drink the stuff.
Yeah,
right?
If the man suspects a woman of adultery, they take her in and they bare her hair, which is shaming her, and then they mix up some ashes from the sacrifices and the stuff from the dirt of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, and make her drink it. And then it's supposed to like turn her stomach upside down if she's if she has committed adultery. It's not necessarily an example of abortion because it doesn't insinuate that she's pregnant. It just in the text it just says something like, and it calls her bowels to get upset.
Right.
So it's not an example of abortion. I think the better example is when the people are fighting and she grabs the guy by the balls and he hits her and calls a miscarriage, which is interesting, by the way, because when the guy calls her to have a miscarriage, he just has to pay a fine.
Right.
Which is interesting because typically when you kill people, you get subject to the death penalty.
They didn't quite view the child yet as right. It tells you the perception of.
Yeah.
So people using the Bible to try and read your Bible in its context, you might figure something out. Yeah.
This is a sotah ritual. If people are interested, there's an entire tractate of the Talmud dedicated to the sotah ritual. Maimonides, by the way, believed that it never worked. That it was just a way for jealous husbands to subject their wife to an ordeal, and basically that it would never work, and therefore they would basically allow the husbands to vent, and they had gone through this process, and it never worked. So Maimonides has a funny view on how that's supposed to work. About how the sotah ritual was supposed to have worked. Also, by the way, if women suspect their men of adultery, there's no alternative ritual, which is crappy. So if you're a cheating dude, you might have to get the sotah done on you.
right? Ronnie S says Jews who entered EU, I think Europe, must have mixed with Europeans. It is impossible to have not mixed with Europeans, not being anti-Semitic. Please don't take it that way.
Sure.
No, nobody's taking it that way. This happens everywhere, though.
Everywhere.
Jews who got taken into Babylon, they mix. In fact, if it wasn't happening, Ezra and Nehemiah would not have written, "Stop."
Yeah, stop doing it. Yeah,
Stop.
oh yeah.
You know.
Yeah, there's a reason why Jews all over the world look like the people of those regions.
Exactly.
Because they end up marrying. I mean, most of the time, right, what happens is men are traveling to those regions alone to establish business connections and commerce connections. They end up marrying someone there. She converts in, so you get a local wife, right?
Didn't you tell me that they would also have like private like sessions where they would like, we're making a vow, so each of us knows that we betrayed our marriage, like we slept with somebody or something, and then like they hold these vows or something, like in the regions they'd go. I can't remember. It's not related to the idea of in like having colonizing or being part of, what do we call that when you become when you start to mix into the culture, the countries? They integrated.
Immigrated, yeah, it's immigrated, yeah.
Like
yeah, but yeah, I mean, the Ethiopian Jews look like Ethiopians. Chinese Jews look like Chinese people. European Jews look like European people. Middle Eastern Jews look like Middle Eastern people. Again, it doesn't. How you look doesn't determine your Jewishness.
Mm-hmm.
Your skin tone and facial features. That's not how it works. It's about the chain of transmission in terms of birth. And if your mother converts to Judaism, and she's Navajo, well, you got a Navajo Jewish mama, and you're Jewish now. Like, it doesn't really. It's just yeah. Of course they married with Europeans.
Yeah, and nobody's taking that. Like, you don't even have to like clarify with that. It's there's some obvious, you could tell that there's obvious like antagonism. Sid Dave, thank you for the super chat. Anti-Semitism is due to religion. Muslims and Christians see Jews rejecting their prophets and can't digest that. Jews are shown as bad in New Testament and the Quran.
That's a part of it. I mean, certainly anti-Semitism has its origins in anti-Judaism, but I think that it can survive in a non-religious environment just the same. I mean, the Soviet Union was a secular state, and anti-Semitism was alive and well in the Soviet Union. Nazism is secular.
Wasn't it impacted originally by the Christian?
Sure. It sort of has origins, right? In the sort of is in the anti-Jewish sentiment of those, but it can easily survive outside of. I mean, again, I know, but there are tons of Norse neo-pagan anti-Semites that aren't Christians or Muslims.
Right.
Whatever, Asatru, and they happen to also be anti-Semites. So it can survive in lots of different. It can survive in many different eras, but of course it has its origins in the religious world, because there was no non-religious world in that time.
Mm-hmm.
Like the 500s. Where's the secular state?
Isn't it?
Yeah, this doesn't exist. So.
Yeah, Sid, thank you for that last super chat. Seriously, assimilate. Eric, you're on the money. I can't think, and I don't know why. I thought it was you who told me the story that like men would make contracts, and in doing so, they also would end up sleeping with some concubine or something, and then they would say, "All right, now we've made a bond. Like we made an ordeal, an immoral one, nonetheless. I could use against you if I needed to, and you could use against me." It was almost like a contract. They would do these kind of things, but
I mean, there are rules in Judaism for having concubines, what are called pila geshet. There are rules for that stuff, but it's been outlawed in Jewish law for hundreds of years now.
Good.
Gersonides outlawed it.
Thank you, Eric, for helping me where I fall short. I want everybody to please go subscribe to Esoterica. Seriously, wonderful friend. What do you got planned for your channel, man? What do you?
What's coming up? I mean, this week is we have a cool, like I said, a really cool collaboration with Religion for Breakfast about the non-Jesus Galilean miracle workers, which is I think a thing that many Christian people don't know, is that Jesus was very similar to a lot of his contemporaries as a Galilean miracle worker. So we'll talk about some of the other miracle workers like Choni the Circle Maker and Nehemiah ben Tosa and Shimon Bar Yochai in the episode. And then Andrew over at Religion for Breakfast will be dealing with the concept of Jesus as a magician. And so that's awesome. A really cool way of thinking about how people may have thought of Jesus, in the first century. And we're also just a place where you can come and get unbiased, or at least as unbiased as I can be unbiased, access to topics on esotericism, right? I'm a scholar of religious studies and philosophy, and my specialty is in what is generally called Western esotericism. And so you can see there's alchemy, Kabbalah, magic, esoteric dimensions of philosophy, ancient Near East mythology. I'm going to be doing an upcoming episode, Derek, on Canaanite, what little we know about Canaanite religion, specifically religious texts and magical texts recovered from Ugarit. So it's our greatest insight into what Canaanite religious practices would have looked like, at least in the Bronze Age.
That's, dude, rock and roll. Go subscribe. I literally commented it in the chat. This was a heavier episode than usual, but I'm glad we dealt with it. He has his website. Go check out his bio. Go check out some of the books. He has books that are 400 and 500 years old. He's selling like original, like these were like pinned, I suspect, right? Were they?
So they're not manuscripts. Manuscripts would be very, very expensive, but they're early printed works. Mostly from most of the books I deal in are from the 17th century. But yeah, they're books of magic and books of alchemy and astrology. It's like Harry Potter stuff, but real. So, so if that's the kind of thing that, like, I don't know, cranks your tractor, as we would say back in Mississippi, you can check out the cool old books.
Awesome. He has the Patreon. Help support him out. Go join him. You can talk to him in private if you felt what he said today and you really appreciate it. Please, he's doing all sorts of stuff there as well. I look forward to that video that you're going to launch. And then, of course, we work very hard here at Myth Vision. Your support keeps us alive in bringing these kind of podcasts and doing what I do full time. So I'm thankful, of course, to have friends like Dr. Sledge to be able to come on and have these conversations. Tough conversations, but really useful and necessary, I think. So please help consider joining, help us out. We didn't get into, and one of the things I was hoping to maybe get is why do you view the things that you do, esoterics and things like that? Like there's like I guess it's an interest, kind of like Harry Potter is an interest to some people. But you went PhD, man. I mean, like you went all the way in trying to understand these strange, weird ideas, but you do practice your religion, which I was going to dive into. Maybe we'll save it for another episode where you can actually say why you still practice religion and how is it useful to you in the century we live in and the day that we live in and the things that we do on a daily. Whereas I can like share my maybe things that you would say, well, see, Derek, that's a tradition and a habit you have that you find necessary in your own household. I find that in mine. I don't know. I'm interested and curious as to how that plays a role in your life.
Yeah, it's complicated. I mean, literally, I'm religious Jew wearing a yarmulke and also wearing like a black metal shirt. Right? I live in a lot of contradictions. Martin Buber said that we're thrown into a world of contradiction, and when we sail so high above the contradictions that they all begin to make sense, then we've evaded our task. Right. That's how I look at it. So we can we can talk more about it. We can talk more about it later. But I think that people who think that they're not living in a world of contradictions aren't thinking hard enough. I just happen to really embrace those contradictions. And I run toward the contradictions. I don't try to get away from them.
That takes a lot of courage. I appreciate you doing that. Nikolai, I was trying to get out of here. Just does Judaism outlaw polygamy? Why or why not?
Not strictly speaking, no, but polygamy was outlawed by Gersonides in the 14th century. That ban just expired a few years ago. So technically, a Jewish person could marry more than one. A Jewish man could technically halakhically marry more than one woman. And Jews from the Muslim world who moved to Israel when it was first founded, some of them moved there with several wives. So no, it is technically allowed. Although Judaism and halakha do mandate that you have to follow the law of the land. And so any observant Jew has to follow the law of the land by the Jewish law. And if the law of the land forbids it, then you can't do it. So not inherently, but de facto, at least in this country, it's not allowed.
I'm going to rock the freak's mind real quick here. Why does he believe? Okay, just to tell, you could correct me here, but he doesn't believe, but he believes. Okay.
Yeah. Or I don't believe, but I do.
I know. You're practicing religious Jew, but you don't ontologically, right? If I'm correctly.
I'm not committed to believing in. I take my religion seriously, not literally.
He doesn't believe that Yahweh is a real literal God who actually created the world, things like that. But he's a religious Jew, which is why I'm curious, wanting to know.
Yeah, there's and if Yahweh were real, if that God were real, we would have a moral obligation to fight against it. I'm not some like Pollyannish, like, oh yeah, you really don't get this Bronze Age, Iron Age God. I'm like, no, I do. And if the God of the Bible existed, we need to organize the angels to overthrow it. But it just so happens that in fact, it's actually part of my disbelief that makes me religious, that allows me to be religious. Because if I did, then I would be like, no, I'm not subscribing to that kind of weird theology. I don't know. Not that theology is any more weird than anything else. All theology is weird.
Brad in the chat always like psychoanalyzing. You know there's something, don't you? Duh. Don't you?
I mean, there's a universe, and most of the universe is I mean, if there is a God, the Gnostics are probably right. it's some demiurge that created a trap for us, and most of the universe is empty space and the vacuum of space and like gamma rays that would kill us. So yeah, if there is a God, I'm pretty sure it's Yaldabaoth or something.
Oh my gosh! All right, this is it. We gotta leave. Jensen's book in the Great Pyramid, Child of the East, seventh angel sounded, reference to, I think, Revelation 11:15 about the seventh angel he claimed to be. Oh, there's all sorts of 12 principles is the basic foundation stones of Baha'u'llah's revelation. Neil Chase.
It's like Baha'i stuff. I don't know. I'm not sure what any of that means.
But if you go through history, there's probably, especially during post-Enlightenment with everybody who also has like these fringe little out there groups after the burned over district in New York, you name it. Like people are applying.
Oh, yeah.
How many presidents probably have fit the seventh angel, or they're fitting the beast, and it never ends. But Zach, thank you for the super chat.
Yeah.
Final words from you?
Do I have anything specific to say? I would just say that that don't let your anti-Judaism become an anti-Semitism. If you want to critique Judaism, fine. But when you found yourself critiquing Judaism and also you're surrounded by Nazis, well, you might want to look in the mirror a little more, right? You might want to look a little harder at yourself because you're responsible for the company you keep. I'm responsible for the company I keep. And I think that our positions are not floating around in the void. And if we hold positions and we find ourselves surrounded by disreputable or hateful people, then we're probably a lot closer to them than we want to believe. And ditto with me, right? I love Kabbalah. But if I'm doing a lot of Kabbalah stuff and I find myself being surrounded by a bunch of like anti-Gentile bigots, I've made a mistake somewhere. Right? We are responsible for the company we keep. We're responsible for the people around us. And when you find yourself surrounded by bigots and all the while you're telling yourself you're not one and telling everyone else you're not one, you might want to look a little harder.
And with that being said, we are Myth Vision.